Okay, great. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Hava Blair. I am a soil scientist and SnapPlus team lead. And today you are attending the webinar titled Winter Manure Applications in SnapPlus V3. So we're focused today on some of the features associated with making winter manure applications. And I'll walk you through how to do that and then how to understand the winter spreading report that SnapPlus generates too as part of a nutrient management plan. So the plan today is that I will be your guide through most of today's webinar, and then we will take a brief break and hear from Wrangler at DATCAP, who will also give some tips related to winter spreading and managing winter spreading strategies in SnapPlus. So the place that I wanted to start today, kind of big picture, is on the fields page. So here I'm logged into SnapPlus version 3. I have my demo farm open for the day. And on the fields page in the overview tab, this is where you can see as a first high level, what are my winter spreadable acres for the fields in my current plan? So we're looking at a table that has one row for each field, and then the column that's all the way on the right-hand side here is my winter spreadable acres. If I click on that column, I can sort it ascending or descending. So I can see I have some fields that do have quite a few winter spreadable acres if I need to use those, and some fields that really have a very small amount of acreage. Everything that I'm doing today is really going to be most relevant to our 590 nutrient management plan. So those would be farms that do not have a CAFO or a WPDES permit. So they have, those CAFO plans have a lot more restrictions, different restrictions. A lot of the stuff I'm going through today is really specific to these 590 farms and the types of winter spreading requirements that are part of the 590 standard for nutrient management planning. So we're looking today at a number of different fields that have different winter spreadable acres. And what I want to walk you through is how we go about making a winter manure application in SnapPlus, and then walk through some of the different messages that you might see related to that application so that you understand compliance messages that might appear and how you address those so that you can meet the 590 standard requirements. Now that we've seen the winter spreadable acres, what I want to do is head over to the management page and just walk through some of the information that we can see on the map and in the nutrient application planner that relates to winter spreading. So I'll head over to my middle field here. And once I'm here on the management page in the field view, I'm looking at all of my crops planned on the middle field. And I'll go up into the upper right-hand corner and open the nutrient applications panel. And that comes out on the right side of my screen. So the first thing that I want to orient everybody to is the information that you can get just from this portion of the screen about nutrient applications in the winter. I have in my mini map here, I can see that this particular field, my middle field, a good chunk of it overlaps with a SWCMA that is around this little kind of pond or lake here to the west of the middle field. In the winter, spreading would be prohibited in the SWCMA area. When I look at my nutrient applications planned on this field, I do have a winter solid manure application planned. And when I click on that application, notice that my map responds to that. And now that I've selected the winter application, what I see is that this whole area that's within the SWCMA is red, meaning spreading is prohibited. The fact that I have the winter application highlighted is important here. So it's saying, okay, you're working on this winter application in this season. This red area is not spreadable. So that's a good chunk of my field here. I'll compare that with what happens when I click on the starter application up here. Now you'll see that red area went away. So I'm looking at my middle field, I don't have any red. This is indicating to me that, okay, this spring subsurface starter application, that's going on this whole field. I don't have any red spreading prohibited areas that relate to that specific application. So that's one of the first things to understand about winter spreading. Now, SnapPlus version 3, similar to SnapPlus version 2, gives you the option to choose what type of spreadable area you're working on in the field, but we're showing that information in a different way. So I want to walk you through how you see those different spreadable areas and select them within SnapPlus V3. When we have acres on a field where winter manure is prohibited, like this red area, as soon as you make a winter manure application, what SnapPlus is going to do is add this additional tab where you can view the spreadable area, the area that is spreadable in the winter, which is what I have highlighted here. It would be this area that is not red. And then since this is a big chunk of my field, this might be a situation where I say, okay, I'm going to spread on this eastern part of the field in the winter, but then I have this big chunk of the field where I have not spread, maybe I'd want to consider a makeup application in a season that's not winter. So in order to manage this area, this type of spreadable area, which is the winter manure prohibited area, we can actually navigate to a different tab where we're keeping track of your nutrient applications for that specific area. So I've clicked on the No Winter tab here at the top of my nutrient application panel. And now what I'm looking at is a new table. So this table is kept updated with only the applications that apply to my current area, which is my no winter or my winter manure prohibited area. And we can see here that I'm still seeing the starter application. So we talked earlier about how that starter application is going on the whole field, but what's not going in this area is manure in the winter. So now that I'm in this no winter tab, it's highlighted blue. If I wanted to add a makeup application that is going to go on only the acres here in this SWCMA area that's winter manure prohibited, I would make that nutrient application just like I would on the other page. So I can go through here and add information about a manure application in a different season. So let's say that I picked a spring application. Since I'm in the no winter tab, notice what happens when I have the spring application highlighted. So highlighting this application, the map is going to show me where is this application going. It's actually going in this bluish gray area of the field that is the SWCMA area, because that's where manure was prohibited in the winter. So I'm saying I'm making a makeup application to this chunk of the field in the spring, and it's showing me, okay, that application is going here. It's not going in this red area because that red area is a different type of spreadable area that we're managing through this other tab. And so the reason that we have it split out this way that you can switch back and forth is for exactly this type of situation where if you have a large portion of your field that can't get manure in a certain season, you might still want to make up those nutrients and be able to see your nutrient accounting for that other section of the field. So you can actually see my nutrient accounting table change, and I'm going to delete my manure application so that's more obvious to you what's going on. In the No Winter tab, we have a separate manure or separate nutrient accounting table for the NPK here showing what am I getting in terms of credits, how much has been applied. If we look at this applied row, you can see that that will change when I switch to the Spreadable tab, because now we're accounting for that winter spread manure. So these tabs are not something that you would need to use on every single field, but this field is a good example of one where you have a good chunk of it that is not spreadable in the winter. And so you might want to consider doing some makeup applications and documenting that with this different area type. Another way that you can see and kind of clarify which area type you're currently working with and how many acres that is by expanding information about the different nutrient applications on your field using this More button. So we have this little caret button in the More column of the nutrient applications table. And what you can do there is expand that, and you get to see some additional information and settings depending on the type of application that you're working with. So in this current example, I'm looking at the starter application, and it's showing me that this is planned to go on 44.3 acres. That lines up with the cropping acres of my field. So I can see my cropping acres up here in the upper right saying, okay, for this corn grain field in 2027, I've got 44.3 cropping acres, and my starter application is going on all of those. That's consistent with what we see on the map. If we compare that with the winter manure application, I'll go ahead and open up the winter manure application here, we can see that this is only going on those 23 acres because this red chunk of the field is about 20 acres where that winter manure is prohibited. So this particular dairy solid winter application is going on a portion of the field, and you can see which portion, like how many acres that is here. So we can compare 23 acres planned versus the cropping acres, which is the whole field, the whole cropped area of 44.3. So you kind of can see that information from the map. You can also see that information if you expand it down here, just different ways to see and understand what are these different area types that you can keep track of in SnapPlus and put your different nutrient applications. One less common area type, at least on 590 farms, would be an area where manure is prohibited year-round. So I have one example that I made just to show you what that looks like. It's managed in a very similar way to these two tabs that we've been looking at here. So if I go to my southmost field, I've just drawn in a prohibited area that is manure prohibited all year on the eastern side of this field. And what I'll point out is that on this page, I now have tabs for the spreadable areas, which would be this part of the western, southwestern part of the field. And then I have this area where manure is prohibited all year. That is an area that I can manage under this No Manure tab. So if I was trying to make applications just to that area that's currently shown as red on the map, I could target that in this No Manure tab. For the most part, you'll probably be starting your planning here in the Spreadable tab and making your applications here, and then assessing on this particular field, do I have a big enough area that might be winter manure prohibited or manure prohibited that I might want to go in and do some fine tuning in these tabs. So it's not going to be relevant to every field or every planner, but we do have that flexibility to visualize what's going on both from the map and be keeping track of those different nutrient totals that you might have as a result of different sets of applications that go on these different area types. All right, I'm going to pause for just a moment and see if there are any questions on that before we make our transition to hearing from Wrangler about setting winter spreading practices on 590 farms. So this is a good time to pause. I'm going to head back to that field that we started on, which is the middle field, and just see if anybody has questions about how this works, how these different tab works, or even the map and some of these different things we see. All right, I'm not seeing anything in the chat. I will slowly make the transition here and introduce Wrangler Jones from DATCAP. And Wrangler, I will unshare my screen and let you share yours. And Wrangler will kick off the next part of the webinar, which is talking about when we're winter spreading on 590 farms. There is a requirement in the 590 standard on some fields to select and use winter spreading practices. And so you might see compliance messages about this in SnapPlus. And we're going to walk through today how to set those practices and what they mean on each field. So I will stop my share and turn it over to Wrangler.
Good morning. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, perfect. I'm going to share my screen here. All right. Yeah, like Hava said, there's some guidelines we have to follow when we're doing winter manure spreading. And I want to start with looking here in the Farms tab here on SnapPlus V3. As you can see, we're in here, our annual notes, we're in 2026. That's how you know what year we're adjusting our settings at. But in our farm settings tab, we have our winter spreading strategies here. If you click on whatever, you need at least two to follow in order to get compliance. So you click those two here, the main ones you're using, and those will be put across all those fields that you are utilizing winter manure spreading on. And my example here is, so I have a field 1 here, and I had my winter manure spreading practices clicked. And if we go into our nutrient applications, and we can see that I made this winter application in this field, and there's just a little yellow dot. That's just a reminder of our applications here. And I can see in my winter spreading practices button up here which ones I have applied. And then if we go into, so this one works well because we have our corn grain soybean rotation. Now, if I go into this field 2 here, we have a red dot here with this winter manure spreading in 2026. And that has to do with this practice is selected but not being implemented. So since our corn silage is, we're not leaving residue on the ground because we're taking the whole plant, it flags the system and lets us know that something that we've clicked on is not working, which is super helpful when going through your management and seeing what works and what doesn't work. And so to just change that, we can go into each field individually if we have corn silage there and just click on what we're actually doing. So we're not leaving, we don't have any crop residue, and let's say we're not applying within concentrated flow channels, I think. And then that should get rid of that message there. And then the nice thing is in field 3 here, we go back to our normal corn grain rotation. And just because we switched it in our field two, it's not going to switch the rest of our field. So we can go back into what should be touch. Yeah. Hava, do you have a thing about that at all? On why that didn't go back to the contour?
Oh, sorry, Wrangler. I didn't hear this last thing you said.
Oh, so like we changed it in field two to being our winter spreading practices is on no more than 50% and then no applications with over. But in our 2026 settings for 2026, we're leaving our crop residue in here. But then I went back into field three and into 2026 into our nutrient applications, and it does not have our leave all crop residue, no fall tillage.
Yeah, so you must have. So one thing that happened here is that if you have, as soon as you start customizing on a field by field basis, as soon as you start customizing which practices you're selecting. So on field three, if in the past you had been in here and you had picked some different practices that are different from what's in farm settings, we save that on a field by field basis. So it sort of then these settings are not going to change globally any longer because you've customized it for this field. Does
Oh,
that make
okay.
sense?
So
Yeah. So
yeah, I
and
think that makes sense.
yeah, and I think that's one thing that was this happened a little bit in version two also, and I have a note that to make an improvement here that we can basically have a big reset button if you wanted to reset the winter practices on every field for the whole plan to match that farm settings. We have plans to make that reset button. But the reason that it's set up like this to begin with is that we assume that if you have been working on a field and customizing winter spreading practices that are specific to that field, we assume that you want us to save that information so that you don't have to come back and redo it again in the future. So that's why it's set up the way that it is currently, where if you've already kind of made some field adjustments for field three, it's no longer going to match that global setting. That global setting is basically applies to any fields that have not been customized.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Hopefully that makes sense for everyone else too. And then yeah, I think I just wanted to make sure this is correct, Hava. But when we're doing our changing our annual notes, so if we're on 28 here, we're actually changing the farm settings here for our winter spreading strategies, correct? Is that
Actually, it's different. And I wanted to just comment that the for anything that's in this farm settings tab, that applies to all crop years. And it's when you get into the crop year settings tab, which is the next one to the right, those are the ones where you really have to pay attention to what that selector says for crop year. So there's kind of two different types of settings. For farm settings, anything you pick on that tab, like that's where we have the CAFO button and some of that other stuff, that's going to apply across the board to all crop years. So manure credits, like all that type of stuff, that's the type of thing that you pick for a farm, and then we set that across the board. The winter spreading strategies, they're here so that if you're working on a plan, if you always use the same two strategies on every field, it's a good idea to set those here. If you have different things going on different fields, then it's a good idea to be working on those within the management page so that you can customize and say, okay, on field three, I know I'm going to have these strategies, on field four, these other ones. So it kind of depends on what the way that you're working with those strategies.
I think that's all I had for my
Okay.
tip and making it a little bit easier to apply those winter spreading strategies versus version two. I know you said in version two that it was possible to set it for the whole farm, but it was more hidden than what version three kind of shows us.
Yes, there was a way to do it, but I think it's a little bit more clear here when it's visible with the farm settings and it's not hidden in a menu that you have to kind of dig a few layers deep to find it. So hopefully it's more clear from this point and then on the management page to where to actually find that information. Definitely.
Perfect. All right. Well, I'll stop sharing and give you back control there, Hava.
Okay, perfect. Yes, I'll put my screen back up. So that is a great introduction because now what I want to do is kind of walk through each of those different strategies that we were seeing on Wrangler's checklist there and talk about what does it mean and how does SnapPlus actually check for that strategy and just give some pointers and tips based on questions that we get related to that. So we will start here on this same middle field, which is the one that we had been looking at together before. And the first thing that I want to do is open up my winter spreading practices and see what I have selected for this field. So this field currently has leave all crop residue and no fall tillage, and apply no more than 3,500 gallons or 30 pounds equivalent, whichever is less. First thing I like to do is just remove one of these checks so that I only have one selected and show you the resulting compliance message. So the requirement of the 590 standard when you have a field that either has a concentrated flow channel or has areas with slope greater than 6% is that you have 2 winter spreading practices selected and implemented on your field. So in my example, I've only checked one winter spreading practice for this field. I have only this one selected. So now when I go and look at my winter manure application, I can see that I'm getting this red compliance flag that says you have too few spreading practices selected. 2 must be implemented from the list. So if you're seeing this message, that's an indicator that you need to check your winter spreading practices by clicking on this button on the field. Next, let's just go through these one by one. I'm going to go through in order. Let's talk about contour buffer strips or contour strip cropping. These 2 practices are both controlled from within the rotation settings box that's here on the left side of the screen. So the strip cropping, contour strip cropping, is a selection under the contour menu. We can see strip cropping is an option here, and if you read the description, it says field contour strips installed and maintained consistent with the 585 standard. So there is a strip cropping standard. By definition, that's on the contour strips. That would be one way, if you had this selected for the field, that would be one way to implement this contour strip cropping practice. The other practice that's listed as part of the same check is contour buffer strips. Contour buffer strips are part of the filter area selector, and that would be the designed infield. And we know that when we read the description here, it says it indicates an infield grass buffer strip on the contour consistent with the 332 standard from NRCS. When you select this, and this is a common question that we get, so let's say that I did have infield grass buffer strips on this field and they were consistent with the standard, I knew that they were good. If I select this here, I'm going to get a message saying contouring selection none is incompatible with infield filter strips. I fix that by going and selecting on the contour here. So by definition, these filter strips, in order to be implemented, they have to be implemented on the contour. So both of those selections need to be picked so that we know what to do behind the scenes when we're running your soil loss calculation, and it's an indicator that those 2 things go together. One thing that SnapPlus version 2 did that was a little bit sneaky, I think people didn't realize this, is that when you picked the designed infield grass buffer strips, it automatically switched your selection to on the contour. As a result, I think a lot of people were picking this choice without really thinking or maybe understanding what this practice is and what the requirements are around how those infield buffer filter strips are actually constructed on the contour. So that's why we give you a message if you don't have that selection correct, because we're trying to flag people just to read through and think about some of these things that they're selecting and make sure that that's the appropriate choice given what's out there on the field and what's been implemented. So that's where you would click to implement things, either of these options in this first winter spreading practice. This next practice, which I'll select now from my list, is leave all crop residue and no fall tillage. This is one we get questions about, and it relates to one of the examples that Wrangler gave too. So I want to look at it on this field. When I select that practice and go in here, I'm going to go in, leave all crop residue and no fall tillage. One question that we often get is, okay, I don't have any fall tillage. Why am I getting a compliance message on my corn grain for this winter application? The key thing to know about that leave all residue is it's looking at the residue from the previous crop year, and the 590 standard specifically calls out that you can't be taking like silage or forage crops off. That's taking off a lot of residue. And so in this case, because we have alfalfa that's coming before the corn grain, that is our issue, and that's why we're not fulfilling that specific leave fall residue criteria, because the 590 standard calls out and says, don't do that if you're taking silage or taking this alfalfa crop off, because of how much residue that's removing before we go into the winter when this application would be made. So that's a common question that we get. And then the final one that I want to look at together is this third one, at least for this field. This third winter spreading practice is apply in intermittent strips on no more than 50% of the field. This one, in order to understand what it's doing, I'm not going to select it yet. I first want to go and look at our winter application as it currently exists. So if I open up my more information about this application, I can see that currently the planned acres are 23 acres. And we looked at earlier how 23 acres is this portion of the field here that's not in the SWCMA. If I go in and select that winter spreading practice, I say, okay, I can't fulfill this one because of my alfalfa. I'm going to pick this third practice about applying intermittent strips. When I confirm that, notice that my acres value here has changed. It changed from 23 to 11.5. That is because of that specific language around on no more than 50% of the field. And in this case, that would be 50% of your winter spreadable area during that application. So that means that I am applying on only half of this area here because that's the practice that I've selected. These little yellow, they're the guidance messages, these little yellow circles. You will see those for many of the winter spreading practices just as a reminder. So because I have this one selected about applying in intermittent strips on no more than 50% of the field, that's going to show up here just as a reminder that this is important information to know about the options that you have selected for this application. All right, on to new field, new practices. We'll head to the north of Maine farm field. And the next practice that I want to look at when we go in here is this fourth one. Apply on no more than 25% of the field at one time with at least 2 weeks between applications. This one, I think, causes a lot of confusion, even for people that look at the 590 standard a lot. So the way that this is set up in SnapPlus is when I select this, unlike this option, applying in intermittent strips on no more than 50% of the field, what this one is assuming is that you're basically coming in and you're splitting up this field into quarters and you are applying this rate basically 1 quarter at a time and you're spacing out those applications. So when we look at the planned acres, selecting that option about applying on no more than 25% of the field during each application, that's assuming that you're coming in and going, okay, here's 25%, and then you wait 14 days or 2 weeks, and then you do that sort of in staggered fashion across the field so that you're not applying on a large area of the field at any given time. This one, like the other one that I just showed, does give you a message, again, a guidance message saying, okay, this is what you have selected. Okay, this next one that I want to talk through is pretty straightforward. So if you pick this practice, apply no more than 3,500 gallons or 30 pounds of phosphorus equivalent, whichever is less. That one, you just have to keep an eye on this value, this P2O5 value for your winter manure application. So for each application that you make in V3, we're showing you the nutrient content of that specific application. So when you pick that spreading strategy that says I'm not going to apply more than either this maximum rate or maximum amount of phosphorus, this is the number that you want to keep your eye on. So this one is okay because it's only 15. As soon as that number exceeds 30, if you were to have that practice selected, you would get a red flag. Excuse me, pardon me. You would get a red flag for that because you have exceeded this 30-pound equivalent. Okay, just a couple more strategies to go through before we talk about the winter spreading report. Over on manure field 1, I have a bunch of grassed waterways, and this is a really good place to illustrate one of the winter spreading strategies that is not applying, no application within 200 feet of all concentrated flow channels. So grassed waterways are one type of concentrated flow channel. There are other types like gullies and non-eroding channels and a number of different things. These are all marked with the GW for grass waterway. And you can see when I select my winter application here with my current practices, I can't apply the manure in the grassed waterway. So I'm seeing that those are red, but I do have these other strips that would be available for me to spread given my current winter strategy selection. If I go in, and I want you to kind of keep an eye on my map here, if I go in and select that strategy that says I'm not going to apply within 200 feet of those concentrated flow channels, notice that what happened now, I've got most of this field is red, because if I go and measure the spacing between these specific grassed waterways, they are not, they're pretty close together. So if I put 200 feet buffer on each side of the grassed waterway, that essentially eliminates winter spreading on this whole field because I have selected that specific strategy on my list. That also has implications for the value that I'm going to see here in this planned acres label. When I open up the more information, I can see, okay, I just have a really little sliver here on this northeastern side of the field that's not covered by that existing boundary after using that 200-foot buffer. So that practice and the applying on no more than 50% of the field practice, those are two that are going to, as soon as you select them for a given field, that's going to change those spreadable acres that you see, because you're saying you're spreading on different areas that basically modify what would otherwise be your manure spreadable area in the winter on that field. And then finally, the last option that we haven't talked about yet is for fields that have less than 6% slopes, fall tillage on the contour is one practice that you can use for a winter spreading strategy. And we talked a little bit about this already. If you're using that practice, you want to set the on the contour value over here in the rotation settings area by selecting on contour. So if that is relevant and implemented on your field, that can be a strategy, assuming that your slopes are less than 6%. So that's a selection you can make over here, and that will meet that criteria for the winter spreading strategy. Right. So I want to just do one quick reminder now that we've dug into all these different winter spreading practices. Reminder that in the 590 standard, these practices have to be implemented specifically on fields that either have a concentrated flow channel or they have areas with slope that's greater than 6%. So as you go through your fields and look at them, and I'm just going to go to my map here and do a little illustration, we can explore this a little bit on my example by turning on the slope layer that we make available that's slope greater than 6%. It's kind of this light pink layer that shows up here, this light pink hashing. That is how you know if there are areas in your field that are showing that greater than 6% slope. So if I go to my north of Maine farm field, you can see I have my SWCMA. Underneath the SWCMA, I have one of those high slope areas. So when you're looking at whether you're required to have winter spreading practices and seeing some of those messages, those are the criteria that the 590 standard mentions. Is they're looking for concentrated flow channels in the field or within 200 feet of the field, and those slope areas that are greater than 6%. So those are both things that you can view in the map like we're doing now. Or another nice way to take a look at that is actually in the field restrictions tab. You can go and navigate for a specific field and a specific crop year. You can take a look at the restrictions in checklist format. So this checklist is connected to the map. When you add a feature in in the maps portion, if that is a restriction feature, it will get updated for the crop year that you're currently working in here in the field restrictions too. So I'm looking, I know for my manure field 1, I had a bunch of grass waterways. So we saw that on the map, and then we also see that that's checked in field restrictions. And this is a good time to remind you too that some field restrictions are saved by crop year. So an important one that has come up a few times is this like a gully restriction, or basically any of these restrictions that you could feasibly change from year to year. So a good example that we just got a question about recently was, if you have a gully on your field, you might be starting to see like gully compliance messages. If the gully is repaired, so if it's repaired, if it's planted to permanent vegetation, you would want to go in and remove that gully from the map and then double check and make sure that it has been removed for the appropriate crop years from your field restrictions. So the way that might happen is you might have a gully on a field for a crop year or something like that, and then maybe it's planted to permanent grass or something like that. It becomes a grassed waterway. In SnapPlus, all gullies are eroding gullies. All gullies are kind of bad gullies. So once those are repaired, that restriction can be removed, and you're going to stop seeing those messages once you show that, hey, now this is in grass or whatever it is. So that's a good example of a restriction that might possibly change from year to year because it's possible to go in and repair a gully or plant it with grass. Other restrictions are not saved by year, and these are the things that really we would not expect to be changing over time. For example, depth to bedrock. Depth to bedrock is a feature of your field. It's not really something that's going to be moving from year to year. So that one is, you're going to see that one present across all crop years. So just a good reminder on how those field restrictions are saved. The last thing I want to talk about here is the winter spreading report. So we've talked about how to make winter manure applications, how to see the different parts of the field that might be prohibited from winter manure applications. The final thing I want to talk through is this winter spreading plan that is required as part of the 590 standard. So this is report NM4 in SnapPlus V3. And I want to walk through some of the specific information that's in this report and then where it comes from and how that meets the requirements for what is included in a winter spreading plan per the 590 standard. So the easiest way to start this is just to run the report. And I can do that here. I'm on the reports page. I selected the NM4 link on the left side, and then I generated the report for crop year 2027. I'm going to zoom in a little bit on my little PDF preview here so you can see the headers. This report has several tables and a lot of different information on it. We have a manure production table that walks through manure production for both 14 days and 120 days. We have information about manure storage for both solid and liquid, if you've entered that in SnapPlus and it gets totaled up. We get a little table that's on the left that just totals up how many winter manure applications in tons and gallons are you making. Talks about grazing as a separate row because grazing has different sets of rules that apply to manure that grazing animals deposit. And then that information gets totaled up too. And then at the bottom of the report, then you have a field by field summary of any fields that are receiving mechanical winter manure applications. So that would be not your grazing, but if you're going out there and you're spreading in the winter, which fields are you spreading on? Which winter application strategies are present, and then it talks about some of those restrictions and shows you, okay, this middle field, for example, this is a field that both has slope areas that are greater than 6% and concentrated flow channels. So it's a field that we need to have those winter practices implemented, and then the report shows you here which ones are implemented. And if I scroll to the right, it also shows if you have a compliance message. So let's say looks like I got all of my compliance messages taken care of, but let's say that I had maybe selected this strategy that I'm going to apply no more than 3,500 gallons, but then I put on an application that was 5,000 gallons. That would get flagged, and that specific compliance flag would also show up here in this space. And then if you had some type of explanation that you added, in that case, if this application is one that happened, you can add an explanation, and that would also show up in this report. And finally, not to be forgotten, at the very bottom of this report is another helpful section that meets part of the 590 requirement. The report identifies, do you have fields in your plan in this crop year that have winter spreadable acres, but do not currently have winter spreading planned? So think of this almost like the backup list. Like, have you been able to identify, or has SnapPlus identified for you, how many acres total, and then which specific fields, if for some reason you could not winter spread, logistics, whatever it is, if you couldn't winter spread on one of these existing fields that you have planned to, what are your backup options that might have winter spreadable acres if you need a place to put that manure? So that's listed at the very bottom of the report here as to acres and field names. So I want to look quickly at where SnapPlus pulls this information for these top three tables. That would be the manure production table, the solid manure storage table, and the liquid manure storage table. This information is filled out primarily on a couple different places, on the nutrients tab primarily. So that manure production table, that is pulling data directly from the livestock tab. Livestock is another one of those things that we save by crop year because we recognize that your livestock numbers and values might fluctuate from year to year. So make sure when you're working on this that you have selected the crop year that you want to be working on. And then you can go through and add livestock using the buttons in the upper left and fill out information about how many head, how many days are they on the farm, and then how is that manure being collected. The main reason that you want to fill this out is because one of the requirements of the winter spreading report is that estimate, that 14 and 120 day estimate that we saw in that table of how much manure is being produced. So this is a kind of a question that we get pretty frequently from people as it relates to the winter spreading plan, because the 590 standard talks about, okay, you've got to show what would the 14-day production or 120-day production be. This table that looks at your animal numbers and kind of does the math for you, that's how you show what the 14-day production is. You might have a farm that doesn't do any winter spreading. You have sufficient storage, so it's not a requirement that you show 14 days of spreading. You don't have to show that you spread this quantity. You just have to illustrate, okay, what would that quantity be in 14 days and 120 days? And you might have cases, and we had gotten a question to the support email about this that says, we're not going to spread in the winter at all. We've got enough storage. So what do I need to do? And the answer to that question is make sure you do have your animal numbers entered so that you can illustrate, these are my animal numbers. This is my storage. It's going to be clear to the reviewer then that you have sufficient storage to meet those production numbers in the winter. And that's really what this report is about making sure if we're producing a certain amount of manure and storing it, is there actually sufficient storage for that winter period, for those months, that like 4-month period or so of the winter? Is there evidence that there's sufficient storage for that here? So this tells part of that story, but I also want to acknowledge that depending on a lot of different things, the assumptions that SnapPlus makes about the manure production here for solid and liquid might not be, they're not the same for they're values that we have to use as a standard value so that we can run this calculation. But if you have other records, hauling records, other information on your farm that shows that this number is maybe different than what SnapPlus shows, that's a really important note to include, maybe as part of your farm narrative or your annual notes, so that reviewers understand that when they're looking at this report. So definitely want to acknowledge that these values that we use for the calculation, they are standardized values, but that doesn't mean that they're the right value for every operation. So I've gotten that question a few times too, places saying, I've got a decade worth of records showing that my winter production is X, but SnapPlus shows Z. What should I do? And our recommendation to people, and we can follow up with agencies about this, our recommendation is document that somewhere to say, hey, these are my numbers, and include that if you get questions that come up during the plan review. So this is one way to go about estimating that production, but definitely recognize that those numbers are not necessarily a fit for every operation. Finally, these storage numbers are pretty straightforward. Those come directly from the storage tab on the nutrients page. So you can go in here and add information about the different types of storage facilities that you have available on the farm. SnapPlus is pulling directly from that to fill out your winter spreading report. And then the final pieces of that report shown at the bottom, we've seen already where these come from. All this information about winter acres, those would be your winter spreadable acres, slope, concentrated flow channels, strategies. SnapPlus is pulling all of that information from the management page and from your field restrictions in order to fill out this table. And this table shows you all that information that might be relevant to understanding what are some of the different restrictions around spreading in the winter on these fields.